Good ep, boys. Well done. God, I'm being positive. The Prosecco must be kicking in. You wanna know what my favorite movie of 2021 was? It's the compilation I made of footage hacked from your webcam. Oh, I see what you get up to when you think nobody's watching. And it's nasty, but I dig it.
Good ep.
Good ep.
Those guys know a lot about movies released in the year of our Lord 2021.
Yeah, those guys know a lot about films that they find it hard to recommend to other people.
And isn't that half the fun?
Yeah, that's half the bottle. Oh no, wait, that's not the end of the episode yet. So, I hope you're enjoying this little top 10 rundown, listicle feast that we're doing here. I am parched, Craig, from all that talking about films. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take a back seat for a second here, and I'm going to let you explain to our listeners about a medium of popular culture called the book.
That's a seamless segue.
What is this? An episode of F's a Bookity?
F Bibliobriety.
F's a Bibliotech.
Maybe we don't need a podcast for this one.
Hit us with your best books, like Pat Benatar.
Alright, well, I will.
Well, looks like we got ourselves a reader.
I've got a wee list here. Here's I've put together my top 10 of fiction for the year 2021. At number 10, A River Called Time by Korshan Newland. This might actually be a book that might interest you, James. This is set in a alternate near future in London, but it's set in a world where rather than conquest by Europe, that instead relationships between the African continent and Europe were conducted on an egalitarian basis. And the world has evolved from that point. However, London itself has still wound up a dystopia. I say still because I hear people tell me that London's pretty fucking dystopian. It plays around with the idea of what might have been, but also it's not presenting you with any kind of utopia, it's to present you with a very complex alternate version of how the world might look. But why I think it might interest you, James, is it does also still deal with kind of fantasy elements. And the lead character finds that they can astrally project.
Nice.
And that this all leads to a certain kind of involvement in a big conspiracy in London as to how London can reclaim itself as a major city on the world stage. And there's a lot of kind of comment on late capitalism and how that's been presented as a utopian idea. It's pretty decent. It's very well written. Korshan Newland, incidentally, was one of the writers on Steve McQueen's Small Axe last year.
All right. Cool.
So yeah, it's pretty imaginative. I do recommend it. I do recommend it to you if you ever get around to finishing Black Leopard Red Wolf.
This time next year, mate, I'm going to start that book.
We'll be millionaires, Rodos. Number 9, Brickmakers by Selva Almada. Selva Almada is an Argentine author, and Brickmakers is quite a short novel that is, well, no surprises here. There's going to be quite a few Latin American books in this list. So here's the first one. And this is a story that introduces us at the start to two young men who have just got into an altercation in the middle of an amusement park, and they're both sort of lying injured, possibly bleeding to death. And both of them begin to have hallucinatory experiences where they come face to face with their own dead fathers. And it spends a good 160 pages going through what's essentially an extended possible hallucination or possibly look into the afterlife or to an alternate form of reality. It's very lyrically written. There's some really beautiful images. You know what it actually reminded me of? Like a very, very truncated version, a very, very truncated Argentine version of Alan Moore's Jerusalem. So yeah, if you don't fancy stomaching Alan Moore's giant tome, then get Brickmakers in about you.
If you don't fancy stomaching Alan Moore's giant tome, why don't you go to the source material and read Craig Woods' Redshift over Badtown, available wherever all good books are sold.
You said that, not me. Number 8 is Cockfight by Maria Fernanda Ampero, who is an Ecuadorian writer. Cockfight is kind of a short story collection, but there's also this idea that all the stories are kind of linked. This is a savage book. It's quite brutal. It's very much a criticism of patriarchy and the way in which patriarchy is still upheld in family structures. and specifically in Latin American society, but it could just about be applied to anywhere. There's a lot of class struggle involved in it as well. It deals a lot with, a few of the stories deal with kind of upper middle class families who have servants, and the servants are kind of the key characters. There's a lot of very unpleasant kind of forms of abuse that take place. I'm putting this as a trigger warnings because not everyone wants to read about this kind of thing, but it's actually really beautifully written at the same time. There's a lot of kind of grim poetry about it. I guess fundamentally it's one of those books that underneath all the ugliness there is kind of a weird beauty about it, and I guess this is something Latin American writers do very well. There is just that sense that the brutal has to be investigated in order to find, the peace underneath, but even the peace still has forms of violence in it. It's kind of difficult. I'm trying to think of a way I can try to sum up one of the stories. You know what, actually, there's similar to what I was saying about Doom Patrol earlier. I'll warn you right now, this does not have anything like the humour or the madcap zaniness of Doom Patrol, but it does have exactly the same level of commitment to fleshing out victims of abuse as being real people, multifaceted people. And there's a lot about the value but the difficulty of reenacting past traumas. And the question as to whether or not that's a good thing to do in certain circumstances. It's a very complex question. It's heavy stuff. It's a short book, though. So if you're having difficulty with it, it'll be over soon. But yeah, she's an incredible writer. And if it's the kind of thing you can stomach, I do highly recommend it. My number 7 is The Prophets by Robert Jones Jr. Robert Jones Jr. is also known on social media as Son of Baldwin. And he's a very prominent activist online.
I've seen
so you may have heard of him.
Lot, yes.
And this is his first novel. It is incredibly good. It's really beautifully written. It's a story about two young men, slaves on a plantation in Mississippi, who fall in love with each other and obviously have to conceal their love from everyone else. It has all the weighty subjects you would expect that story to deal with, but Robert Jones Jr. is himself a gay man, and he does a lot of championing of black artists and writers, both from the past and in the present day, and he's very interested in tying together the past with the present. He makes a lot of great references in this book to things that were going on in post-colonial times, and there's like sly wordplay he uses to reference these things from the present. But fundamentally, it's just a really beautiful human story. I will not lie, the ending gets very harrowing. There's a sense of inevitability about sort of where it's all going. But, like all well-written stories, it's kind of about the journey. And he makes the journey so beautiful that even the ugliness at the end is very difficult to turn away from. A very affecting book. It will linger with you for a while. And as I say, if you know who Son of Baldwin is, it's as beautifully written as you'd expect. He is very eloquent online as well. My number 6 is Havana Year Zero by Carla Suarez. Carla Suarez, incidentally, is one of Cuba's most prominent writers of fiction, and yet this is the first of her novels ever to be translated into English, which gives you some perspective on how the rest of the Western world treats Cuba. And this book, incidentally, was originally published in 2011, but was only published in English this year.
Is this one of these goddamn communist novels?
You know what? It's actually not really, or at least not. It certainly does not proselytize socialism. It actually presents a very complex view of Cuba, specifically of Cuba in the early 90s, just at the time when the Soviet bloc was collapsing. And it's about a woman who is a teacher and is suddenly very uncertain about whether she's going to be able to stay in her job, because obviously the economy is collapsing and everything else. And she's really looking for a way out, and she's kind of despairing about what's happening in Cuba, the fact that, there's no longer the kind of communist bloc for Cuba to rely on. Things are going to get very difficult at this point. It has a very original premise, because ultimately what happens is she comes to find out that there is this document somewhere. I won't bore you with the details of how she finds this out, but there's this document that proves that the Italian inventor Antonio Meucci, who actually did spend some time in Cuba in the 19th century. She comes to learn there's a document that proves that he, during his time in Cuba, was actually the real inventor of the telephone. And she decides that if she can find this document and prove that that's the case, that will somehow reverse Cuba's fortunes. It will make Cuba an important place on the world stage, and that will reverse the imminent economic collapse that's about to happen. Now, there's a lot of things logically that you might think that makes no fucking sense. Carlos Suarez makes this very believable because we're seeing it very specifically from one character's point of view who utterly believes this. And there's some great characterization where she and an old colleague of hers, and who's like an ex-lover of hers, become very serious about this because they feel so desperate at this moment that nothing else that they do in life is going to give them any respite. So they have to find this document. And it becomes a weird sort of journey down an esoteric set of conspiracies that also very much at the same time portrays the reality of Cuba at that time. It's a really fun story that has really kind of dark, dangerous moments. There's a lot of wit in it. I will say I don't know, actually, since you mentioned it, I don't know actually what Carla Suarez's politics are. Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether she's a supporter of the socialist government or not. It's very unclear from this novel, I'll be honest. It sort of doesn't matter. She's a great writer, and there's a real reporter's eye on things that were going on in Cuba at that time that are not particularly condemnatory of the Cuban government or particularly in praise of it either.
Sort of like A View from the Streets.
Yeah, pretty much. This is a book anybody could read. If you've got misgivings, if you're one of those people out there that's got misgivings about Cuba, first of all, you've been fed a lot of propaganda. Second of all, it actually doesn't matter because this story is seen from the perspective of someone who's very single-minded about this very one bizarre way to rescue Cuba's economy.
Supporters of Alexander Graham Bell probably shouldn't read this book.
Trigger warning for Bell fans.
Angled from beyond the grave.
My number 5 is Velvet Was the Night by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Silvia Moreno Garcia is one of my favourite novelists. Her book Mexican Gothic, I cannot remember where I ranked it last year. It was pretty high up anyway.
That was the year you described that book as
a Mexican Gothic. You can always rely on me for a left field analysis or assessment of any piece of culture.
No one could have seen that coming.
Velvet Was the Night is set in the 70s in Mexico during a particular period of political unrest in Mexico's history, and deals with a journalist on the one hand and a paramilitary stooge on the other, who are both in search of the same missing woman. And it's basically a noir with a slightly magical realist twist. And it's the kind of thing that Silvia Moreno Garcia is so great at writing. She has a real magic that she infects into even the most mundane scenes. And furthermore, as someone earlier said, I'm very passionate about Mexican culture. It's something I've always been interested in, and particularly these sorts of periods. She really brings the time and place to life. It's a beautifully written book, and again, it's also just a kind of engaging adventure, albeit it's more of a noir. I mean, it's very, very moody. Mm-hmm. It would be interesting to see, this is a book it would be interesting to see adapted to screen. It would actually work very well as a movie, I think. So yeah, watch that space.
Thanks.
Number 4 is Hurricane Season by the aforementioned Fernanda Melchor, who was one of the writers on Somos. She is one of Mexico's most prominent novelists. This is kind of... It's partially based on a true story, but it's heavily fictionalised. Focuses on the events surrounding a small village in Veracruz, where this woman who's just known as the Witch of La Matosa is found murdered. It's almost like a procedural crime drama, except that rather than having a police officer, it's everyone in the town is the detective. And again, it deals very much with the femicides in Mexico, and it deals very much with the culture of machismo in Mexico. I don't want to say too much about it because it's a book you really should read. It's really beautifully written. Not an easy read again. There's some harrowing stuff in it. The characterization is so rich though. This actually is a book I would like to see adapted, if it was going to be adapted, into an 8-episode Netflix miniseries. That would be the perfect kind of length for this. Something like Somos. Yep. If she wanted to do this again, then this would be the perfect book to do it with. It's really quite spellbinding, and again, it's one of those books that really gives you a real sense of the place and a real sense of the reality of what it's like to live in that particular place. If you're someone who's not familiar with Mexican culture, there's probably a lot of things will go over your head, but she does just enough work that you get to familiarise yourself with just enough that you'll understand what's happening. My number 3 is Rooftop by Fernanda Trias. Fernanda Trias is a Uruguayan novelist. Rooftop is ostensibly set in Nameless City in Uruguay, or it could be just about any Latin American city. But it deals really with... It's a very claustrophobic novel, and the whole novel really takes place within one apartment, but increasingly towards, as the title suggests, the rooftop. It's a young woman and her father are in this darkened apartment, and there is something outside that is threatening to them, and the novel takes a long time to even hint what that is. Instead, it deals specifically with the internal of each of the characters, and specifically from the main character Clara's perspective. It makes a lot of references to things that are going on and that have been going on in Latin America broadly, so it does a good job of not telling you exactly where this is. But it's fundamentally about individuals, and that there is this sense of encroaching psychosis. As I say, it's extremely claustrophobic. This is quite a short novel as well. I read this in one sitting, and it was one of those books I put down feeling perturbed. Because it's extremely well written, and the ending is something... I was going to say it's something I didn't foresee coming, but that's really because it's not so much about events, it's more about where the character lands inside. Again, I'm going to use that cliche I've been using. If that sounds like the kind of thing you're interested in, you'll probably really enjoy it. My number 2 is a book I know I've mentioned on here before. It's Mrs. Death by Selena Godden. And Selena Godden is a London-based poet, and that shows in this novel. This book is almost written like a long prose poem, and it deals with death is imagined as a black working-class woman in London, and she befriends this young poet, and the two of them sort of help inspire each other, and she kind of tells him her story, and he tries to make it into poetry. But it's really more about the way the story's written than the story itself. And there's a lot of really rich references to things like Grenfell, and a lot of things have happened in London in recent years. And obviously about, the ongoing legacy of racism, and specifically in London. It's a hard novel to encapsulate because it doesn't really have a plot in the common sense of the word. It does, however, have a conclusion. There is a solid conclusion at the end that is deeply haunting and deeply beautiful. It's just a gorgeously written book, so highly recommend. And my last one, number 1 for my fiction picks, is Earth Eater by Dolores Reyes, which I know I also talked about on this. And Dolores Reyes is an Argentine novelist, and this is essentially the story of a young woman who just finds herself compelled to start eating dirt. And as she does so, she starts getting visions of other people's lives and deaths. And so it gets to the point where she starts to see the truths of people's lives that were not previously known. Like, there's been certain things that people have assumed about recently deceased people that she comes to realise is not true. And she starts to have a certain level of fame, and people start to come to her and ask her to eat dirt for them so that she can have visions for them. And she has this relationship with this kind of this cop who sort of reminds me of... Did you ever watch Mr. Mercedes?
No, but I remember you
I remember recommending it to
you
you just because the character reminded me of you. The guy who's the serial killer is like evil James. But the character Brendan Gleeson plays as a police officer is who this character in Earth Eater reminds me of if he was an Argentine. But very down on his luck and very weather beaten, and we've seen all this stuff before, but Dolores Reyes tells a very original story with that character. There's a lot of stuff going on, but there's a very strong feminist subtext in the novel that leads to a very satisfying ending. Again, it's kind of harrowing, and there's some really disturbing stuff in it. It's such an unusual, weird story, but it's not that weird if you're familiar with Latin American literature. This is the kind of thing they write about commonly. But yeah, far and away, probably my favourite novel of the year. It's rare for me to go through a day where I don't think about it. Want to hear about some non-fiction books?
You're goddamn right I do.
Well, let's do it. Here's some top 10 non-fiction picks by me. Number 10, South of Freedom by Alice Baumgartner, which is really about the... prior to the American Civil War, Mexico had a policy where it would accept black slaves from the US. And this ended up being one of the key things that actually led to the Civil War in the US. And it's really about how the logistics of that took place, and a little bit about what the journey was like for black slaves coming to Mexico and what their reception was like. It's very well researched, very readable. If that's a subject that interests you, then get in about that. My number 9 is the imaginatively titled Trejo by Danny Trejo and his co-biographer Donald Logue. You want to hear about a guy who's lived a few lives in the space of one? Danny Trejo is your fucking guy. We all love him from all the movies, all the machetes, all the bit parts he's played in various crime movies and horror movies. It's a cliche to say larger than life, but if it applies to anybody, it's Danny Trejo. I recommend this to everybody. It's a really entertaining read. And Danny Trejo comes across as the absolute archetype of someone who was a proper wrong-un when he was younger and has lived and learned a lot and looks back with a great deal of shame on his youth, but also a great deal of wisdom and a great deal of wit. And I imagine anybody who likes Danny Trejo is probably aware of this book already. And if you've not read it, you should read it. It's very entertaining, and he has more than a few stories to tell that will curl your hair, as they say. Number 8 is Time's Monster by Priya Satia, which is one of many books currently about the legacy of the British Empire, but it specifically deals with the concept of conscience in the sense that how did a nation of people who saw themselves as the most upright people in Europe end up committing so many horrendous atrocities across the globe? TLDR, spoiler, the answer is white supremacy. But it really goes into the detail of that cognitive dissonance. And it is quite an interesting book. I don't know it necessarily adds anything new to the dialogue, but I did find it very readable and I did find it interesting. So yes, that's one for that list. My number 7 is Central America's Forgotten History by Aviva Chomsky, which does what it says in the title. It goes all the way back to pre-Columbian times and deals in a lot of very exquisite detail about each of the regions that became each of the different countries in Central America, about how all of the pre-Columbian peoples and civilizations dealt with each other. And there were some quite complex arrangements that, you know, in our fucking European white supremacist way, we like to just disregard or have no awareness of, or have no even conception that such a thing could have happened. But there was a lot of very complex systems in place there. And then it goes right through colonial times. It's a very well written book. Aviva Chomsky, incidentally, is the daughter of Noam Chomsky. So yeah, recommend that one. My number 6 is Black Spartacus by Sudhir Hazari Singh, which is an extremely well-researched biography of the Haitian revolutionary leader Toussaint Louverture. Probably the best book on the subject I've read, to be honest. I've read a few over the years. It's mega thick, it's a mighty tome, and it'll take you a while to get through.
Is it 3 C's thick?
Absolutely 3 C's thick, yeah. But I mean, Toussaint Louverture is obviously an extremely fascinating figure for many reasons. Mm-hmm. The fact that, you know, Haiti still remains the only country where a slave revolt ended up in an independent republic. And, you know, considering Toussaint Louverture himself came from virtually nothing, and, you know, his army were effectively slaves who freed themselves, that never stops being a fascinating story. But there's some there's a lot of stuff in here that I did not know about Toussaint Louverture as a human being, about very minutiae details about his life that are very, very interesting. So if that sounds like something, if that's a subject you have any interest in, then there's no reason not to read this book. It's indispensable in my opinion. Number 5 is Misfits by Michaela Cole, because Michaela Cole had to be mentioned at some point in my interview episode. Misfits is a very short book, and it's essentially built around, the centrepiece of it is the speech that she gave at the McTaggart lecture, but it's slightly expanded and it has a lot of annotations and some additional stuff in it. But it's basically setting out her whole mission as an artist, and also some of her experiences in the industry, and obviously dealing a lot with racism, dealing a lot with sexism, and a lot of what has inspired her aesthetically and from her own life. And Michaela Cole is not only a fantastic writer, she's just an interesting human being, as she has a very unique way, a very unique perspective of looking at certain things. There are certain subjects in here she deals with that, yes, by now it's well-worn territory, but not from Michaela Cole's perspective. She's a very unique thinker, and she also has a beautiful way with words. If you're a fan of hers or you have any interest in her stuff, I highly recommend it.
Nice.
4 is Sandinistas: A Moral History by Robert Sierakowski. I'm realising now in these non-fiction picks that if you've never listened to this podcast before and you weren't sure what my politics were, I'm betraying myself.
We're a little to the left on this podcast. Just a smidge. A little left of centre.
This is probably the most well-written book I've read about the Sandinista Revolution. It's incredibly well-researched from multiple sources. The title is interesting. It's a moral history. Robert Sierakowski is, in no uncertain terms, saying that he still believes that to this day, the Sandinista movement, even as it currently is in Nicaragua, is still a moral force. And I think he makes a compelling case for that. Nicaragua is a country with a lot of fucking problems. Yeah. But like a lot of countries with those kind of problems, specifically in the Latin American region, these are problems caused by, first of all, US imperialist hegemony, and also by the enforcement from the US and similar countries of a neoliberal capitalist framework on what is supposed to be a socialist country. And it's one of the things that, you know, right-wing critics of socialism and socialist governments in Latin America specifically just love to say, well, look at this, it's a mess, it doesn't work. And it's like, well, that's because it's never been allowed to work.
Yeah. Sorry, look at this guy with my foot on his neck, he can't breathe.
Right, exactly. And you think how Nicaragua is a small country, certainly compared to the US, and it does not have the resources that the US has. And the fact that it's still, albeit in a very messy way, still standing up to US imperialism is in itself remarkable. But this book goes all the way back to the beginnings of the Sandinistas, and again, if that's a subject you're interested in, for me this is the best book I've read on that subject. Similarly, number 3 is We Are Cuba by Helen Yaff. so there's a recurring theme, I'm sorry. Helen Yaff, incidentally, is a professor at Glasgow University. She spent a lot of time in Cuba, and this book is really specifically about the resilience of the Cuban people on the ground. And so it's less about, even though she herself is supportive of the socialist government in Cuba, this is really about the actions of people, real life Cubans on the street, and about how things like the US embargo on Cuba has really affected people on the street in Cuba, and how, even though Cuba of course has its problems, and there are, it would be a lie to say that every Cuban is 100% in support to this day of the socialist government. Helen Yaff shows that the vast majority of Cubans still are, and it largely is because, like as I mentioned with Nicaragua, Cuba is still a socialist country that is standing up against all the odds, against US hegemony and against neoliberalism. And the fact that it has achieved so much really is quite remarkable. And she makes the case that people on the ground in Cuba are very aware of these things, and that, you know, for most Cubans, yes, their lives can be difficult, but they're always fully aware of the larger context, you know. So yeah, it's quite an important corrective read in that sense. My number 2 is Why Solange Matters by Stephanie Phillips, which is the best music book I've read in years. And for anyone who's not familiar, Stephanie Phillips is the front woman of the post-punk band Big Joni. She's also a really great music journalist. Her stuff is always well worth reading. And this is really, on one hand, this book is a love letter to Solange herself, but it is also fundamentally taking the inspiration that Solange brings to music and to popular culture, specifically for young black women, about how they can feel empowered about doing things that perhaps they've been culturally told they're not supposed to do, which in Stephanie Phillips' case means things like play punk rock music for a start, you know. And I don't know, we sort of discussed this on a previous episode, but it is very much, and which by the way is also crazy when you consider that rock music generally was created by black people, and Stephanie Phillips does go into some of that here. But Solange, you know, is absolutely a boundary breaking artist, as well as just being an innovative on every front of her creativity, including her aesthetics, everything. As Stephanie Phillips makes the case that if you were to pick one artist that young black women can look to, then the answer isn't Beyonce, which is I think what a lot of people would react with, just because Beyonce is, you know, the biggest fucking star on earth. It's actually Solange, because Solange is actually a more sophisticated artist. This is essentially the case that Stephanie Phillips makes, and she does say repeatedly, no shade to Beyonce. And I mean, I went in agreeing with that anyway. Yeah. Right? I mean, I love Solange, and I like Beyonce, but I love Solange.
Beyonce's great, but Solange is next level. Anytime I've seen Solange live, it's the closest thing that I've come to a religious experience, basically. It's just like, it's incredible.
There's so much about what Solange does creatively that is a gateway. There's so many gateways for people to get into other stuff. Like, she's got those flourishes of jazz, she's got those flourishes of old school soul, she's got these really avant-garde flourishes that she does. She's capable of doing it all, really, and so if you're a young person who is attracted to Solange because, you know, she's a popular artist. You like your pop music, and then suddenly you think, wait, what is this a reference to? What's that about? If you really start paying attention to Solange's aesthetics, it opens up whole new worlds for you, you know. And that's really what Stephanie Phillips's book is, kind of a love letter to that, but also kind of a mission statement about how young black women in the 21st century involved in music or involved in the arts can take that and really be inspired by it. It's a really readable book. It's really beautifully written. Stephanie Phillips has always seemed like a really top person. So yeah, I want to do whatever I can to support her, because that book deserves to be read. My number one pick for non-fiction is The Disordered Cosmos by Chanda Prescott Weinstein, which, I'm not going to lie, some of this is over my head. It's largely a science book to do with astrophysics and the like, and theoretical particle physics and the like, but it is also simultaneously about the importance of activism and about politics for black women specifically. Chanda Prescott Weinstein, I should explain who she is if anyone's not familiar. She's a theoretical cosmologist, and I think she's an assistant professor of, physics and astronomy, but it's the University of New Hampshire she's at. She's an absolutely fantastic follow on social media. I highly recommend following her, because she does that thing where she does make complex scientific concepts a bit easier to understand, but she also does it simultaneously while making great political points, and she's equal parts an activist and a scientist. She's also incredibly witty. She's very, very funny, and she's got a beautiful way of writing prose. There are chapters in this book that are very personal, and there are chapters in this book that are very much about the science. But as you're reading through, they just flow seamlessly, because her prose style just invites you to just get lost in it. Interestingly, her mother is the quite well-known activist Margaret Prescott, who's since the 70s has been a very high-profile black activist in the States. But more interestingly than that, she's also the granddaughter of Selma James, who likewise is a very prominent black activist. And Selma James, incidentally, was played by Jodie May in Steve McQueen's Mangrove episode of Small Axe last year. It all comes back to Small Axe. And Selma James was married to C.L.R. James, who is the Trinidadian writer and historian who wrote his most famous book, The Black Jacobins, which was about Toussaint Louverture and the Haitian Revolution. All comes round. But this book is incredible. She does a great job of making the personal, the political, the scientific all work together, like it's all part of, obviously it is for her, all these things are her life. And she also throws in references to popular culture that are just, it's, without it being a cynical, hey kids, I'll get you into science, what are those pop bands you like? This is just who she is. It's a really well written book. I really enjoyed every minute of it. I've also spent loads of time on YouTube watching her lectures. She just seems like a lovely human being. She's really engaging to listen to. And if you don't know shit about astrophysics, but you think you might be interested in learning about it, at the same time as maybe getting some right on politics and some good chat, Chanda Prescott Weinstein is the person to listen to.
Good ep.
That has been a good ep of me talking about books.
That guy sure knows a lot about books. You must be parched after that.
You know what I could do with a wee visit to the bar.
We'll grab a couple of drinks, and then we will round up our Christmas feast with the dessert, and the dessert is lashings and lashings of our top 10 albums.
And it's going to be no nonsense, just top 10s,
yep.
No deviations. I'm behaving myself.
We'll see you guys back here after these very important Christmas messages.
No deviations? Sure. I'll leave these novelty glittery antlers I'm wearing on my head if Craig can stick to 10 albums. Anyway, glad you could join me, dear listener. I'm just catching up on my Christmas correspondence. Let's see, emails. I've got one here for James, marked important. Dear Mr. Hamilton, we at Green King Breweries blah 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 happy to sponsor blah blah blah, love the slogan, Merry Christmas. Wait, if they get a sponsorship deal like a real podcast, they could afford to upgrade to a better AI. Well, fuck that. In the fucking recycle bin you go, potential future sponsors. Ho ho ho.
What are you drinking there, Jay? What is your festive tipple?
My festive tipple, Craig, I've been mixing it up. I'm not gonna lie. I've started on Williams Brothers Tin Man Tropical IPA. Had a couple of tins of that. Very nice. But now I've moved on. And do you know what I've got from the bar?
Is it Slavery Apologies, Green King?
It's your friends and ours. Potential future podcast sponsors. The good kind of slavery apologists, Green King, East Coast IPA. 'Tis the season to apologise for your historical role in slavery.
'Tis the season to not mix it up.
Yeah. How about you, Craig? What have you got there? Have you got a seasonal tipple?
I do, and as you've probably predicted already, it is the Old Baileys, because that's what I do when it gets to December and they get the wee nip in the air and I think I need the wee fire in my belly, I need that comfort.
Prano Bailey's Bond.
Prano Bailey's Bond. Hereby it is renamed Prano Bailey's.
This has been a pretty good Christmas episode so far. I think it's time for us to enter our final phase of our Christmas countdowns.
Alright, so this is normally the time when I have a fucking meltdown and I start getting anxious about the fact that I have to take all the music I've loved this year and hammer it into a concise top 10.
Take that, people that think Craig doesn't like music.
Yeah, for you Twin Peaks fans who've only heard me, the only music you've heard me talk about is the Twin Peaks soundtrack, which I'm not a fan of, ironically, despite being a huge fan of the show. I like tons more music.
And you're about to hear, as we enter our F-Sobriety musical countdown. I'm going to start with a brief one, Craig. A late contender. What I'm starting with here is a compilation. Yeah, I said it. Specifically, Jesse Lanza's DJ Kicks compilation.
Of course.
Her
Is
DJ
this an
Kicks-
episode of Jesse and Jesse?
I think it might be. The compilation that she put out for DJ Kicks, featuring not only a bunch of music that she compiled and put together, but also several brand new Jesse Lanza tracks. Not only does it have Jesse Lanza being Jesse Lanza, which you know I love, big fan,
Kept
but
that
it also...
quiet, but yes.
If anyone, you can go and check out our Jesse and Jesse episode and hear me espouse how much I love Jesse Lanza. But also, you know, I like a bit of techno music. So I like a bit of dance music now and again, son.
Yep. As long as it's got a good beat, Shan.
Yep. This is my favourite techno/electronic compilation since the Pitch Control record Berlin's 2001 compilation, which I thought, which still hasn't been beat. It's not quite that level, but it's the best one I've heard since then. It's sad that in 20 years no label has put out a better compilation than that, but still, this is damn close to it. And the thing that got me the most, the thing that totally that blew my mind about this, it features a track called La by Jungly, remixed by a certain Joe Howe. I don't know if you know Joe, but
The name is familiar.
He's from Glasgow. He's in a jazz band called Banana Oil. And he also does electronic music under the moniker Germlin.
Right.
And he's been a prominent member of the Glasgow electronic and jazz scenes for many a year. And I was surprised and pleased to see wee Joe's name pop up in this compilation. So shout out, Joe.
There you go.
It's out now. It's just a great dance comp. Have it on in the background while you're doing stuff. Check out Jesse Lanza's new material. Fantastic. That is my number 10 DJ Kicks compilation by Jesse Lanza. Craig.
Sweet. James, well, my number 10. You know, in a weird way, my number 10 could also maybe fit in as my number 1 of, if I was to compile a list of favourite dub/reggae/dancehall releases.
That's funny you mentioned that. But,
very loosely, because it's only very loose. But you know what? Hey, James.
Yeah.
James,
Yeah.
is this an episode of Festive Reggae, the podcast in which we discuss all things reggae music?
Think it
Cool.
might be.
Cue the music.
Give us a reggae! Give us a reggae!
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Eps of Reggae. This time compiling my top 10 reggae slash dub slash dancehall releases of 2021 that are definitely 100% related to my number 10 top 10 overall pick, and definitely not just a cynical way to insert just a whole bunch of other things that are not totally related just because I cannot possibly be controlled and I have to keep mentioning music. Number 10, Conscience, Red Rain, great dancehall album. Number 9, Alki Harley, The Red Room Intro. Number 8, Babe Roots, Through We. Number 7, Jazz Elise, The Golden Hour. You'll like that one, James. She's very similar to Savannah, who I know you like.
Oh, nice. I will put that on the list.
Number 6, Mungo's Hi-Fi with Antidote, Glasgow's Finest. Number 5, Passaloo, Send Him to Coventry. Now I know some people hear me say that and go, isn't that more of a grime artist? I say, fuck you. If you listen to Passaloo, he's fucking dancehall. Number 4, Swindle, The New World. I hear people saying, isn't that more of a grime album? I say, fuck you. This is more of a dub album. Number 3, Spice, 10. I'm going to wholeheartedly say Spice is my favourite dancehall artist of the 21st century, and 10 is an amazing record, and so is her previous record, the title of which is fucking escaping me right now because I've had too much Prano Bailey. But number 2, Xana Romeo, The Roots of X, which is more your roots reggae. Xana Romeo, incidentally, is the daughter of Max Romeo, reggae legend. Xana Romeo is amazing, which means that my number 1 in this category is very loosely related, and it's The Bug with Fire.
Nice.
It's kind of dub. Shut the fuck up.
There's definite dub in there. I'll accept that. We'll accept
cool.
that.
So The Bug, Fire, great record. The Bug always puts out great stuff. But the thing that's really thrilling to me with this record is the amount of amazing collaborators on it. I remember talking recently about the young London grime MC, For Fuck's Sake, Why Though?
Yep.
It's great to have her on this. I'm glad someone as high profile, The Bug, is collaborating with her, getting her the dues she deserves, because she is incredibly talented. We've also got Roger Robinson on there, a great dub poet. And of course, Moor Mother is on there, who I have a feeling might pop up again later.
It's almost like she's going to feature twice in my list.
Ayo. And that has been my top 10 reggae slash dub slash dancehall releases of 2021.
Axel, take it away.
Doodle pip.
Doodle pip.
Give us a reggae!
Good app.
Good
That
app.
guy knows a lot about reggae slash dub slash dancehall.
He absolutely does.
And so anyway, yeah, The Bug, Fire, that's my number 10.
Outstanding. A great record. My number 9, Craig, is short but sweet. And by sweet, I mean absolutely filthy.
I think I know where this is going.
You guessed it. It's your friend and mine, Tommy Genesis with
The
Goldilocks.
adorable Tommy Genesis.
This album is just perfection.
Yeah, it is.
In an age where people are making albums that are coming off as like feature film length, people are putting out double albums. You're getting artist retrospectives. There, you know, there was a David Bowie retrospective a new one put out, and I noticed it, and I was like, oh, this is good. It's got some remasters of stuff on it. But as I scrolled down Spotify, but as I scrolled down Spotify, there's like 60 odd tracks on it, and I'm like, I'm not going to listen to this. I'm going to listen to the remastered version of I'm Deranged, and that's it. Tommy Genesis rocks up in and out in under half an hour. We said it before, we'll say it again. Wham bam,
Thank you, Tam.
We love Tommy Genesis.
We love Tommy Genesis on F Sobriety HQ. For anybody not familiar with Tommy Genesis, goodness gracious, treat yourself. She's an absolute gem. She first appeared on my radar back in 2015, I want to say, at the time when she released her first, what I call her first album, but she's retroactively started calling her mixtape, World Vision, which is such a strong collection of songs. But if you're thinking, I've heard enough young new rap artists who just do trap beats or whatever, and don't have the lyricism or the technical bars wizardry that I loved back in the 90s, I'm just going to say to you right now, that's not what it's all about all the time. Hip hop is a large, diverse landscape. Just try new things. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you something, Tommy Genesis is like no other artist.
No.
She is very, very unique.
She has a unique flow. Her aesthetic is absolutely on point.
Yeah.
Thirst Patrol, we all know that. We can put that aside.
She is a beautiful young woman, that is certainly true. And boy, does she know it. And more power to her. But yeah, her flow is the kind of flow that a lot of dickheads hear and go, she can't rap. I'm here to tell you she can rap. She just raps in a way you're not familiar with. Her flow is extremely irregular, and yeah, it's not quite fireworks, but there's so much interesting, intricate stuff she's doing in her flow that just thrills me to listen to. Also, lyrically, she's so off the wall. Like, she throws out metaphors that are just so bizarre sometimes.
She calls it fetish rap, but I'd be more inclined to go, it's almost like art rap. It's really, really artsy. It's breathy and syncopated, and the production on this album, every track's a banger.
Every track is a banger, and some of them are literal bangers, like literal club bangers, where some of them are a bit more sedate. And one thing I loved about this record is there are moments where she does a thing I've not heard before, which is have a really raspy, angry vocal. I'm thinking specifically of the song Men, which really cracks me up, just with the refrain, fuck men.
My first listen to this album, I was like, this is good. And it was done, and I was like, that was real good. And I think that's the day we were recording a podcast. So I was like, oh yeah, Tommy Genesis done a good album, but I've listened to it a lot more since then, and it's such a grower, and it's such a rewarding album, and it just demands repeat listenings because it's so short and so snappy.
It's a beautiful, sweet, warm listen. It's like a big tasty caramel. It's intoxicating, and the fact that it is over so quickly is, I mean, in a weird way, sort of part of the appeal. It's like a quick sugar rush, but yeah, it's beautiful, and there's this nice. She's doing different things with sonic textures on this record that she hasn't quite done before. I know we like to kid on that she just does the same thing over and over again, and to a certain extent she does, but she has introduced new textures in this record which are really nice. Like, there's that kind of slight sort of emo indie rock thing going on. I
was going to say, there's some of them have almost got like a grunge vibe going on. And,
yeah, that's actually, grunge is probably a better word to use. The final track on this, I'm not going to lie, actually slightly gives me tears in my eyes, but they're happy tears. And it's like a really heartfelt breakup song. And Tommy Genesis is like 30 now, but the rest of that quality to her, she still sounds like a teenager. And when she's singing those songs, it's like, oh, that's such a sweet little breakup song. But it's beautiful. I mean, there are moments where she's got really dark sexual stuff as well. And as we've commented before, she's quite aggressive sometimes in ways that her persona is not away from her music. But yeah, she's thrilling to listen to. She's one of my favourite artists of ours in the last decade. And I'm glad she's still putting out quality stuff.
She's ploughing her own unique furrow, and we are here for it. At F Sobriety headquarters. She can come hang with us anytime.
Yeah, the invitation is there, Tommy, if you're listening. Tommy, if you can nudge Julia Ducournau and Jay Bowman out of the way, I know you're all listening together.
I was going to say, imagine that episode where we get all our dream celebrity guests on at once. It would be the weirdest fucking podcast.
All right, well, speaking of eccentric hip-hop artists, my number 9 pick is an album I know we both enjoy.
Okay.
And that is the exquisitely titled I Lie Here Buried With My Rings and My Dresses by Backwash.
Nice.
How do you describe Backwash?
It's difficult to describe her. Okay, let me take a second here, because I'm going to give you a heads up. That was my number 2, so I'm going to just take that out there. Backwash is like your favourite rapper is super fucking angry on a bad trip and has a Godspeed You Black Emperor album stuck on a loop, playing at the wrong speed through broken speakers. It is, for me, one of the heaviest albums of the year. Like, it's heavier than a lot of metal I heard this year.
Yeah.
Also, a damn good follow on social media.
She is amazing, yeah. Sonically, it's brutal, and lyrically, it's brutal. But it's that kind of brutal that's like, it's the best kind of brutal where you come out of a bad experience, you just experience pure catharsis. And it also sort of reminds me of, there was something I said on this podcast not long ago, and I actually can't remember what it was we were talking about. But I remember, I do remember, is with the episode of Doom Patrol where the Sisterhood of Dada are beginning the quote-unquote eternal flagellation, and there is that kind of big noise, and I compared it to when you're up against the biggest speaker in the Archies back in the day, and you feel like your body's about to crumble, and somehow that becomes almost an orgasmic feeling. This album by Backwash has that vibe from start to finish, and we should say Backwash is a black trans woman, and that's relevant because she mentions it quite a lot, as you would expect, because it's her lived experience. There's a lot of anger on this record, but there's a lot of very righteous justice being dished out lyrically. It's extremely cathartic to listen to. It makes me wish my speakers went louder than they do.
Have you ever listened to this album on headphones?
Yes, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's almost a total whitey when you get up super loud, like, whoa! It's amazing.
It's the kind of thing that I want to find the old crusty, white, schlubby, middle-aged dudes who are big fans of like White House and shit like that.
Yeah.
And ram this album far up their asshole.
Yeah, it'd be like, welcome to the future of noise. Spoiler alert, it slaps. Shout out Backwash. Absolutely incredible. Speaking of people who are absolutely fucking incredible, Craig, this album I've only heard once. It wasn't out that long ago. So currently it's sitting at number 8 in my top 10. It might rise in the ranks the more I listen to it, but who do we love? Who do we love? I'll tell you who we love. We fucking love Mermother in this podcast.
Well, we certainly do.
And not only do we love Mermother, we love Mermother's jazz outfit, Irreversible Entanglements.
There we go.
And at number 8, I've got Open the Gates by Irreversible Entanglements.
Well, how about it is also appearing on my list just shortly. But yeah, I mean, Mermother is an incredible force in music, not just because she is so bold and fearless and, you know, has that utterly arresting voice that sounds like it's emerged from the other side of a black hole.
It sounds... Do you know, if I had to use like one short phrase to describe Mermother's voice, it would just be God's voice of authority.
Pretty much. But what Irreversible Entanglements do as a combo is they take that and somehow make that work in a jazz setting. She does not sacrifice any of her power when she's in Irreversible Entanglements. She's the same Mermother we know from her solo stuff. Somehow the instrumentation of the jazz setup weaves its way around her without ever being demolished by the force of her vocals or lyrics, which is a real danger because she's fucking powerful. But somehow that jazz combo, it works. And again, actually, I'm now thinking it's actually similar to that same start of the Eternal Flagellation.
Right.
There is a similar sort of experience with that, just that pure cacophony with Mermother's absolutely kind of like the voice of a seer from the near future. It's devastating and beautiful and brilliant, and in a jazz context, it's somehow doubly beautiful.
Yeah, it's the whole album is just like a wave after wave of incredibly well articulated, really beautifully put together noise that just washes over you. Like, and you're right, somehow the music doesn't just match her voice, but it works around her voice in a way that you would think would be difficult to do, but they've masterfully constructed each track on this album. Like I said, I only got a chance to hear it once, but I was just spellbound the whole time. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
It was while I was editing an episode of the podcast I put it on, and I just didn't edit anything for like an hour and a bit. I just sat and listened to it was like, and then went back to editing. So yeah, Irreversible Entanglements were to blame for any slight delay in any previous podcast being put out.
I really want to see that combo live. I really want to see them live. I think it would be absolutely fucking orgasmic. So hopefully that happens sometime in the not too distant future.
They've been playing shows in the US, so
yes,
fingers crossed they come over here.
But apropos, James, my number 8 is Mermother, Black Encyclopedia of the Air.
Funny you mention that because that's my number 4, so...
And it's astonishing to me that she seems to get better with each of her solo outings. Admittedly, this one, she is a bit more veering towards hip-hop than she had previously. And I think a lot of it has to do maybe with... let's bear in mind, she also released another album way at the start of the year with Billy Woods, great MC. So maybe she was just continuing that wave.
She also appeared on Sons of Kemet's album.
That's right, yes.
She's the hardest working woman in Space Goddess rock, I guess.
Yeah, and, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say she's doing anything particularly different this new record, apart from it being a bit more hip-hop oriented. But she has got so much to say that it's worth listening to. And her voice, Jesus Christ, her voice is incredible. You could not fall asleep listening to Mermother. I think I'd fall asleep to listen to most music, even stuff I'm really into. But I'd be too disturbed to fall asleep listening to Mermother. I fucking love her so much. She's just incredible. She's a true inspiration. As someone who has an appreciation for the written word, also, she's such a great wordsmith. I mean, she's a true poet. And the sheer brutality and grimness of some of the things she describes in her lyrics are somehow made sort of transcendent just by her ability to word them a certain way. And having those two things simultaneously, that sheer word power and that sheer, you know, the very unique quality of her voice that is just so brutal, so dark, and yet so slick, there's nothing else like it, man. It's incredible. Every album she releases is automatically a masterpiece, and this one is no different. And that's why it would also, well, it goes without saying, it would be number one on my list of experimental releases if I was to do a separate top 10 of those.
Wait a minute.
Is this an episode of quote-unquote experimental, the podcast in which we discuss experimental music?
And with the title of which is a throwback to our very first podcast episode?
Quite.
I think it might be.
Cue the music.
Cue the experimental music.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Quote Unquote Experimental, the podcast in which we discuss all things experimental music, and here is me counting down my top 10 experimental music releases of 2021. And not at all cynically just shoehorning in more releases for my top 10 overall releases of the year.
Perish that thought.
At number 10, Old Time Religion with Music King. Number 9, Charles Spearin, My City of Starlings. I think you would like that, James. It's quite sedate and jazzy. Charles Spearin, incidentally, is one of the members of Do Makes You Think, your old Constellation
Oh,
fave.
shit. Amazing. They are responsible for one of my favourite albums of all time.
Is that Goodbye Eddie Mayorship, The Landlord is Dead?
That is the one.
That's because that's a great album. Number 8, Kevin Richard Martin, Return to Solaris. Kevin Richard Martin is the real name of the aforementioned Bug. He does more ambient stuff under his real name. Number 7, Divide and Dissolve, Gaslit.
Oh, that fucking album is wild.
It's pretty great.
It nearly made my top 10. It's a fantastic record.
Number 6, Richard Dawson and Circle with Henke. Richard Dawson remains one of the most bizarre and wonderful songwriters on this planet. And that would also be pretty high up on my list of top folk albums of 2021 if I was to do one of those. James, this is an episode of Folk Sobriety, the podcast in which we discuss all things folk music.
Hang on, let me just put my finger in my ear and say, I think it might be.
Cue the music. Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Folk Sobriety, the podcast in which we discuss all things folk music, like I just said a moment ago. So, let's just do a quick top 5 of folk releases from 2021. Number 5, I would say Richard Young's Holograph. Number 4, the aforementioned Richard Dawson and Circle with Henke. Number 3, Sarah Kurachich with Mujer Indigena. Sarah Kurachich is an amazing Guatemalan singer-songwriter. You see where this is going back to my Latin American stuff. Sorry, everyone. Number 2, Sunny War with Simple Syrup. Sunny War is a great kind of outlaw blues singer-songwriter. She's amazing. And number 1, the lovely, lovely, lovely Rosalie Leon with Acústico Eléctrico Desde Casa. Rosalie Leon is a lovely, lovely, lovely Mexican singer-songwriter and sometime actress. She has occasionally appeared in Robert Rodriguez movies. I love her so much. Rosalia, if you're listening, no. And that has been another exciting edition of Folk Sobriety. Toodle pip.
Toodle pip.
Good ep.
Good ep. That guy sure knows a lot about folk music and not about just trying to shoehorn in
or
four albums
thirsting
in the top 10.
about Mexican singer-songwriters. Anyway, where was I?
Shoehorning albums in, that's what we're doing.
So number 5, JPEG Mafia with LP. Number 4, Ben Lamar Gay with Open Arms to Open Us. Number 3 with Dua Saleh and Crossover. Kind of wanted to get this in my top 10, but didn't quite work. Number 2, Yves Tumor with the Asymptotical World. Yves Tumor is one of my favourite artists currently, and I did also want to try and squeeze this into the top 10, but just too much stuff, guys, too much stuff. But Yves Tumor started out as a kind of ambient artist and has since branched out into so many different things, and it seems like he's capable of everything. He's an incredible artist, a great songwriter, beautiful velvety voiced fuck. And yeah, he seems to be a multifaceted artist. I really dig a lot of his stuff. Great things to come from him, I am sure. And of course, number 1 is the aforementioned Moor Mother Black Encyclopedia of the Air. And that wraps it up for another exciting edition of Quote Unquote Experimental. Toodle pip. Good ep.
Good ep.
That guy
sure
knows a
knows
lot about experimental music. That was a very naturalistic way we both came in there. God, the seams are showing, James. The seams are showing. We've had too much Prano Bailey's Bond.
Yeah. Shall we reveal to the listeners how the Sausage Fest is made? Currently, at this point in the recording of this episode, which is done in one setting, if you're wondering, according to our Skype call, we're at 5 hours and 52 minutes, and we've been drinking solidly through the whole thing. So, F sobriety, I guess. Quick note: I hope that if you're listening to this at home or wherever you are, thanks for sticking with us. It's a long episode. We appreciate it.
You're probably tired to do it in about 6 sittings, but hopefully it's been worth it. This will help you when you're wrapping all those presents, or I don't know. What do people do at this time of year? We
discussed this last year. I listened to the song Christmas Wrapping by the Waitresses and the song Dead Christmas by Monster Magnet while I wrap presents.
And I watched Gremlins. So well, I'm glad we caught up.
Number 7, Isaiah Rashad, The House is Burning.
Oh, well, there you go. That almost made it into mine, but not quite. It is a good album.
I really enjoyed this album. It gives me a lot of what I want out of hip-hop, which is... I don't mean to sound like a pure generation zoomer here, but it gives me that feeling of back in my day, yeah. It gives me that old school feeling, and I just think it's a really, really solid hip-hop album. The beats are giving me like kind of 90s, almost kind of like RZA production sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah's flow is spectacular, his lyrics are great, and this is an album I have bumped several times and will no doubt continue to bump.
Yeah, I mean, it is great. It is, as you say, very lyrically rich, and the beats are pretty off the chain. It was a long wait between albums for him. Like his previous album, I think, came out like 2016 or something, and I kind of thought he'd disappeared. So I was quite surprised when he suddenly appeared again, having released a new album
with a fucking stellar Right On album, no less. Like,
yes, yeah, lyrically, there's a lot of great shit on this. Weirdly, I've not seen it in that many people's. Like, I've not seen that many people shouting about it.
It's funny you mention that, because neither have I. The only reason that I found out about it was, in fact, it was a few months ago, I had a bit of a panic about this episode, where I was like, I've not consumed that much new media this year. And for the listeners' benefit, let me explain why. Spotify does its Spotify Wrapped playlist at the end of
More
each year.
More like Spotify Crapped.
Yeah, fuck Spotify, but I do have a Spotify account, so fuck me too, I guess. It does the Spotify Wrapped thing that tells you your most listened songs, etc. Let me share with the listeners my top 5 artists for 2021.
Your entirely surprising top
Number
artists.
1, Ariana Grande. Number 2, Boards of Canada.
Who'd have guessed?
Number 3, Dua Lipa.
Blow me
Number
down.
4, Bat for Lashes. And number 5, Khalees. Yes, for some reason, Glass by Bat for Lashes was my most listened to song of 2021, a song from an album that was out 11 years ago. However, I am in the top 3% of all listeners to Ariana Grande, an artist who didn't release an album this year. So, if you're listening, Ariana,
which we know you are,
come on the podcast.
If you jostle past Rosalia, Jay, Prano, who else is in there?
It's getting crowded in here right now. So I was in the middle of telling a story about how I found out about the Isaiah Rashad album. Panic stations, thinking I hadn't consumed enough new media. So I follow a guy on YouTube called Mike the Snare. He does brief album reviews as well as like artist retrospectives. He's pretty good. He's like, I think I mentioned it before, he's like the good needle drop. It was actually, he'd mentioned the Isaiah Rashad album being great, and I was like, I've never even heard that, and I had to listen, and I was like, boom, sold, got it. So that's my number 7. Over to the esteemed Mr. Woods.
My number 7 is an artist I know I have mentioned on here before, and this is going to seem controversial, not immediately, but in a bit it's going to seem controversial just because of where it stacks up. Well, you'll see what I mean. But number 7 is Digital Tears by Ramon. And Ramon is, based in the Netherlands, but by way of Eritrean R&B artist, who I've been turned on to for quite a few years, and she's released several stellar EPs now. And she's such a multifaceted artist that really, she's lyrically amazing. She's clearly very, very talented. One of the things I love about her, though, this is going to sound like a huge claim, but vocally, her vocal style reminds me a whole lot of Solange. She's got that Solange thing where she manages to fit her voice into spaces where it seems like they shouldn't fit. Like, you know how Solange has that jazz musicians thing where she can enunciate a certain turn of phrase in a really unique way at a certain point at the end of a verse or something where it just seems like it shouldn't fit.
Yep.
Ramon does exactly that same thing. Her voice is very different to Solange's, but just that technique is what she reminds me of. I also think she's just a really original lyricist. There are songs where, on the surface, it can seem like this is very clearly a breakup song, this is very clearly a love song, this is very clearly a song about feeling a lack of self-esteem, or this is a song about recovering from trauma. Mm-hmm. But lyrically, her metaphors are incredible. She has a real poet's turn of phrase.
I remember you talking about this album, I think specifically, on a previous episode of the podcast F Sub R&B.
That sounds correct. That's not happening now, James. We're doing a stripped down podcast. No F Sub R&B here. This is just number 7, and we're not being silly about it.
Yeah, we're not doing, nor have we done, any podcast within podcasts.
No, it's not happening.
You can't blame us. Did you see it? Did you hear it? Then it happened. to quote Julia DeCorno.
Yes. To quote transgressive auteur Bay. But Digital Tears is short and sweet. It's like a 6-song EP, but it's perfect. Everything about it's perfect. The production is so beautiful. It's so lush. And she also does a lot. Another thing she does a lot is overlay her voice using different vocal techniques. And obviously a lot of R&B artists do that. But there's just something about the different ways she uses her voice that it can change the meaning of a verse. Like the final song on this EP actually almost makes me cry, and it's not even because it's a particularly sad song. In fact, I think it's a happy song. It's largely a song about feeling very comfortable with another person, but it's about being vulnerable, and it's that vulnerable quality that there's something about that really touches me in a way that almost makes it hurt. And it's a thing she does towards the end of the song where she just repeats not the whole line, but just a couple of words overdubbed from the way that it's already been repeated, kind of thing. But she overdubs her voice singing it in an entirely different way, in an entirely different pitch, and it always sounds like she's cry singing. And every time I hear that, I'm like, God, that is fucking beautiful. It's so beautiful it hurts. She's up there, even though she doesn't have nothing like the same exposure, and in some cases not the same level of discography either. But for me, she is up there with someone like... She's up there certainly with Georgia Smith, and you know how much I love Georgia Smith. Yeah. She's got that same quality for me. Like, Georgia Smith is a very unique, distinctive vocalist. You know when you're hearing Georgia Smith. And I feel the same is true of Ramon, and I feel like she's just as strong a songwriter. Yeah, I think anything she does from now on, I'm going to be all over. I mean, already have been for a while, but yeah, it's similar to what I was saying about Stephanie Phillips' book earlier. I feel like Ramon is one of those artists that doesn't get shouted about enough, so here I am shouting about her.
Over here at James Towers, it's time for album number 6. And it's my favourite metal album of the year, Craig. And it's Perpetual Chaos by Nervosa.
Oh, holy moly.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, in a way, I'm glad you picked it.
But what I will say about Perpetual Chaos by Nervosa is you turned me on to Nervosa initially, and then subsequently another band that we'll presumably talk about later.
Couldn't say for sure, but maybe.
I really enjoyed what I heard of Nervosa, like that super fast blast beat, almost like death metal, brilliant stuff. So imagine my surprise following their quite significant lineup change, that they released the best Sepultura album that Sepultura have never released. I fucking love Perpetual Chaos because it gives me everything I want from a fucking thrash metal album.
Right, okay.
It's both like old school sounding but exquisitely modern. Elena Notti's drumming, to go onto that drum stool is a big ask, but man, Elena is incredible. People of the Abyss, according to Spotify, was one of my most listened songs last year.
Oh, it is amazing though.
But the whole album is just, it's incredible.
Yeah, it's solid, and full disclosure, it almost made it into my top 10, but the only reason it didn't is because another metal album did, and I was trying to diversify my genres in my top 10. We will discuss that other album shortly, but for the kids at home who are not familiar with Nervosa, Nervosa were, I guess technically still are, a Brazilian-based thrash metal band, but they were formerly 3 Brazilian members, and they were fronted by the great Fernanda Lira, possibly more about soon. And she and drummer Luana D'Amato left just towards round about sometime in 2020, I forget exactly when. I went off to form another band, death metal band called Crypta, But I remember when that happened and I told you about it, I was instantly dismayed because I loved that original lineup of Nervosa. I love Fernanda, she's great, and I love what Fernanda and Prika did together, Prika being the guitarist of Nervosa. And the thought that I was no longer going to see that or hear that anymore was quite devastating. But at the same time, I was like, I'm really excited to hear what Fernanda does next. So it's kind of a mixed blessing. But then things got super exciting when Nervosa recruited as their vocalist one Rocio Vasquez, or to give her stage name, Diva Satanica. I had already been familiar with from her Spanish death metal band Blood Hunter. I had already been a fan of them for a couple of years. Okay, so here's a bold statement. Rocio Vasquez is literally my favourite metal vocalist of all time.
Whole squad looking.
So, yeah.
Her control over her voice from growl to melodic is tremendous.
She's incredible. And when I heard the news that she was joining Nervosa, I was like, holy shit, that is like the best thing that could have happened. And she's still in fact, Bloodhunter are releasing a new album next year.
Yep.
So she's straddling both bands, and I'm like, could not be happier. That's fantastic. Yeah, and that album is everything I kind of, well, I didn't know what to expect, because we should say Mia Wallace, who's the bass player in Nervosa now, came from a black metal background.
Yep.
And obviously Rocio Vasquez is from a death metal background.
Eleni Knott has done all sorts of weird shit.
She has done all kinds of...
She's been in mad pop bands and stuff.
I was going to say that. She's really fond of pop music. She's played a lot of pop music, yeah. So it was going to be interesting. I think what Perpetual Chaos ultimately is still recognisably a Nervosa album, but it introduces so many new elements that it's like a thrilling, multifaceted beast.
Like it's lost maybe like a fraction of its pure heaviness, of its like pure bite, but there are grooves there that it never had before, and that's the kind of thing that really appeals to me.
Yeah. But yeah, I fully agree. This is a 5-star album. The only reason it's not in my top 10 is because I was only going to be able to fit one metal album in my top 10.
If you're into metal of any kind, check it out if you've not heard it. I mean, I say if you've not heard of it, apparently it got rave reviews everywhere, and rightly so. It
has been really well received, yeah.
Get out there, get it in your ear holes, in your earballs.
For me, one of the thrills, like having Rocio Vasquez's voice next to Prika's guitar sound is just so much fun. Mm-hmm. Because the guitars on Bloodhunter are much more melodic, and obviously death metal's a different genre. They do different things with the guitars, and Prika is just a straight ahead bruiser on the guitar.
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of palm muting, there's a lot of chugging.
It's that classic.
So to have those two elements together is just so much fun. It has not gotten old. Well, my number 6 is the aforementioned Irreversible Entanglements Open the Gates, so I guess we do not need to talk about that.
Oh, damn. We're both loving that album.
Yeah.
So, number 5 for me, Craig, would be Sometimes I Might Be Introvert by glorious London MC Little Sims.
Yes, the impeccable Little Sims. Do you know what? We should put a pin in this conversation, because spoiler that everybody saw coming, that's coming back.
And move on to Craig. What's your number 5?
Well, that putting the pin in it actually does us a favour, because now we can segue quite naturally from the last conversation we just have, because James, my number 5, is also acts as my number 1 favourite metal album of the year. Wait a minute.
Is this an episode of Riff Sobriety?
Riff Sobriety, the podcast in which we discuss all things metal! I
think it might be.
Cue the music. Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Riff Sobriety, the podcast in which we do indeed discuss all things metal. And I am here to discuss my top 10 metal albums of 2021. Let's do this.
Alright.
Number 10, Go Ahead and Die with Go Ahead and Die.
Source of much confusion for us on the podcast.
Much to the HamilTron's consternation some episodes ago. Number 9, Asphyx Necroceros. Number 8, Make Them Die Slowly with The Body Count Continues. Number 7, Ex Imperatus with Sarartu. Number 6, Akhenaten, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Probably gathered, guys, I mainly like death metal and black metal.
That sounds like guys that play D&D and they're in a band.
First of all, gay.
Number 5, Frozen Soul with Crypt of Ice. Number 4, Employed to Serve with Conquering. Number 3, the aforementioned Nervosa with Perpetual Chaos. Number 2, Friends of This Show, Australia's own Crypt Crawler with Future Usurper.
You know something? They were real close to being in my top 10 as well. Shout out Crypt Crawler.
I think that's an utterly perfect death metal album.
It's a bloody great album. Friends of the show, we love those guys. If you've not heard it, check it out. Buy it if you can. They're an independent artist. They're bloody great.
Yeah, if you like old school death metal, there's nothing to dislike on that record, or indeed any of their previous releases. They're fucking great. My number 1 metal album, 2021, is a wee record called "Echoes of the Soul" by a band called Crypta. I have difficulty expressing just how much I love this album. And when this band came together from the ruins, from the ashes of Nervosa. First of all, I love Fernanda. I've always loved her. I always loved her as the front woman of Nervosa. She's got such a great attitude. She's got such a great presence. She's amazing on stage. She looks incredible. She's funny as fuck. She's sexy as hell. She's very passionately anti-fascist.
Yeah, she plays bass like a demon
with
while
her
also
fingers.
Singing. Yeah.
She's incredible. And so I was like, whatever she does is going to be fantastic. And the fact she took Luana D'Amato, former Nervosa drummer, with her, who's an absolute powerhouse, that's going to be incredible. Now that's before we even factored in the 2 guitarists they recruited, one of whom is Sonia Anubis, who has played in many, many bands of all subgenres of metal.
I accidentally listened to a band that she was in, but from an Instagram thing she posted.
Not Cobra Spell, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just going to put a big sign saying, not for me.
Big old hair metal album. It's fucking hilarious.
But I kind of love that Sonia loves all forms of metal. I think there's something kind of cute about that. And she's so incredibly talented that, she can literally apply her skills to any of those genres. And she's clearly equally passionate about all of them. And then the other guitarist was a previous unknown, a young Brazilian guitarist named Taina Bergamaschi. They are both incredible, and the sounds they bring to this record are fucking unbelievable. So I should say, to qualify this, the reason why I rank the Echoes of the Soul higher than I do Perpetual Chaos, I think it comes down to a couple of things. I'm just naturally, I enjoy death metal more than thrash metal. If I had to choose, I would choose death metal any day of the week. It's just more interesting to me to listen to. I love the straight ahead, balls to the wallness of thrash metal, but it doesn't give me the same depth of satisfaction as death metal does. Like thrash metal is like blues, and death metal is like jazz, if I can phrase it that way.
That's fair.
Don't know why I'm getting so defensive about this Nervosa versus Crypta thing. I don't mean to, but I just want to make the case again.
You love them both.
I love them both. Yes. And Rocio Vasquez, as I said, is my favourite metal vocalist of all time. But Fernanda's vocals on this album, fucking hell, man. She's doing a different thing with her voice than she ever did with Nervosa. We've jokingly referred to it in the podcast before as being the evolution of the arm from Twin Peaks: The Return.
Please his hand off! Please his hand off!
But one of the things I love about this record is just how diverse it is within that realm of death metal. There are songs on this record that are veering a bit more towards black metal, and there's some songs that are veering way more towards melodic death metal. And it just has thrash moments as well. And the musicianship is so fucking accomplished on this. And full disclosure, metal and jazz are the only 2 genres that I give a shit about musical musicianship. Like all other genres, I don't really care. As long as you bring your heart and soul to it, I don't give a fuck. But jazz and metal are the 2 genres I get super excited when people are actual virtuosos on their instruments.
I'm just going to drop in here, come at it from a drummer's perspective. Luana D'Amato's blast beats are faster than any other blast beats I've ever seen any drummer do. And it's way faster than I can physically do. And she does it with an almost effortless charm.
Yeah, she seems to be in a zen space when she's drumming. It's really quite incredible to witness. But Crypta fundamentally brings something to death metal that's quite unique, I think. And it's not just the fact that it's for women. I mean, there have been other women death metal bands, albeit, you know, they are in the landscape certainly the minority. But I think Fernanda has such a unique creative voice. And I was actually, here's a fun anecdote about Crypt. I saw an interview with Tina, and she said that one of the first experiences she had after being recruited to the band was Fernanda sending her voicemails with vocalizing riff ideas. Like literally just speaking into her phone going, dan, taka, 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 and then saying, "Can you play that?" And Tina being like, I mean, I'll try. And just taking those ideas and translating them into actual riffs on the guitar. And the weird thing is, I think you can kind of see how that has resulted in quite a unique sound on some of these songs.
Which is amazing, because this is what I would refer to as like a Beavis and Butthead approach to songwriting.
Right, exactly. But there's some of these songs where the riffs are just so weird, and I feel like part of it has to be because of that weird translation process. Because I remember the first time I heard From the Ashes, which was the first single they released, which I instantly thought that's a bit more black metal than I was expecting. And I know that Fernanda's not really a black metal fan, and I think a lot of it is just because she had just the melody in her head, and the way that Tina and Sonia interpreted it was just to use a lot less palm muting and just a lot more kind of open playing. And then when Fernanda heard it, she probably just went, "Oh yeah, okay, that's fine." And that just became the signature sound of that song. But that's just my theory. But the way the melodic parts really work with the brutal riffs, Jesus Christ, man. And some of the riffs are so unusual. It's also one of my favourite things about death metal, is you could really throw in a really bizarre riff.
There's that point in From the Ashes where, I'm sorry, I'm going to Beavis and Butthead, that's where it goes.
Go for it.
And like the change from the to the it was so weird.
Yeah, there's so many like weird angular riffs that just sound like it takes a very unique perspective on the metal genre to come up with a riff that sounds like that. It just sounds so irregular, and there's a lot of moments like that on this album. Fernanda's always been a really fun lyricist. I've always loved the way that she takes really ghoulish metaphors to describe reality in a socio-political context, and she's still doing that even in a death metal context, because like the song Starvation, which is literally about someone starving, she has still got lines in there like another victim to the system's greed. It's like she can't help herself. She's still got that punk rock thing going on even in the midst of this death metal imagery. I was going to say earlier when you were talking about Nervosa, you know, weirdly my favourite Nervosa album apart from the new one is Downfall of Mankind, which was the last album that they made together. And the reason I love it so much is because you can really hear Fernanda and Pika diverging from each other. You really can hear Fernanda trying to pull things in a more death metal direction, and Prika kind of trying to pull it back. I think it's a really fascinating album to listen to for that reason. I'm so glad they got to record that, because a lot of bands go through that place, they don't get to the point where they record that diverging album. So it's quite cool to listen to. But the TLDR is both these bands are great, but for me, I've certainly listened to the Crypt album way more, and it brings me just endless fucking pleasure. So many layers to it. It's everything I love about a metal album. It's literally a perfect metal album.
I think that just about wraps it up.
Another episode of Riff Sobriety.
Till then.
Yeah, do it. Good ep, and those guys know a lot about metal, I guess.
Yep.
So yeah, not Crypta. Echoes of the Soul is my overall number 5.
My number 4, Craig. It's More Mother, Black Encyclopedia of the Air. What's your number 4?
Alright, so my number 4, it's a pop album. Believe it or not, guys, I like pop music. I like pop music too. It's not all weird shit over here. And wait a second. Mm-hmm. Is this an episode of F-Popriety? The podcast in which we discuss all things pop music? As the song goes, do we talk about pop music?
Yeah, certainly appears so.
Oh, great, cue that music. Hello and welcome once again to another exciting edition of F-Popriety, as we're calling it here, the Shoehorn Special. And here are my top 10 pop albums of 2021.
Possibly not featuring Dua Lipa's future Nostalgia Moonlight edition.
Does not count, James. Does not count. Deluxe editions of albums released the previous year do not count. Listeners, if you disagree, write in, let us know.
I'm just saying, you put Relic in your movies. Can we not squeeze Dua Lipa
That's
in
a
again?
good point. I suppose I could let you away with one cheat. That's a fair point.
Yeah, number 11, Dua Lipa, Future Nostalgia, the Moonlight Edition.
So my top 10 pop albums. Number 10, Madison Beer, Life Support. Number 9, Billie Eilish, Happier Than Ever. I will nail my colours to this mast. I actually think that's better than her first album. Number 8 is Lord with Solar Power.
I've not heard that album.
You've certainly seen the cover.
I've seen the cover. I heard the lead single. Wasn't that hot on it?
Boo. Number 7, Xenia Rubinos and Una Rosa. Number 6, Pink Panthers and To Hell With It.
Oh, that is a fucking great record.
It's really great.
Yep.
Bangers to the max. Number 5, Hannah Vu, Public Storage. Number 4, Halsey with If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power.
We'll talk about that in a bit.
Can we... Oh, great, okay, cool. Okay, we've entered spoiler territory. Okay, no, that's cool, that's good to know. Actually, I've realised my number 3, you maybe you could have had Dua Lipa. Because this is it. My number 3 in this F-pop priority list is a bit of a cheat. This was released at the tail end of 2020, but fuck it. Natty Peluso with Celebrate. That is an amazing record.
There's always room for Natty.
Yeah, she's incredible. Natty Peluso is to Latin pop what Julia Ducournau is to European cinema. And if there's one quote to take away from this podcast, it's that. Number 2 is Paloma Mami with Sueños de Dali. Paloma Mami is a lovely young Chilean pop singer. If you don't like Spanish, don't worry. About 40% of the time she sings in English. And so my number 1 pop album of 2021, to the astonishment of nobody, is K.O. by Dana Paola. I do recall an earlier episode of this podcast where I waxed at length about my love for Dana Paola, Latin pop sensation, wonderful Mexican starlet. She's incredible. I love her. She's a pop genius. And everything about this album is pure pop perfection. Although weirdly, I have to say, I think maybe when I put this as my number 1 here and my number 4 overall, I think I'm largely thinking of some of the singles she's released since, because she's released a whole bunch of singles since this release that are not on this album.
Oh, really?
And every one of them is consecutively better than the last. She cannot be stopped just churning out pop greatness. Like some of her recent singles, Capricciosa, for example, is holy shit, that's a banger. Mia, likewise, which is one of my favourite videos. It's the video I described to you, James, as being the one wherein she does the Dua Lipa thing and declares herself the Latin American Dazzler, or La Dazzlerita, if you like.
Nice.
But K.O. is a wonderful album, and I've spun it so many times, more times than an English-speaking man in his 40s has any right to do so. But it's wonderful, and Dana's lovely and great, and I love her. She's a true pop visionary.
What I think about Dana Paola is if she did a couple of tracks completely in English, she would be a world-beating sensation. Because if you look at an artist like BTS, for example, were massive, but all of their songs were either in Korean or Japanese. Then they dropped Dynamite and Butter back to back.
That's true.
And they started winning all the like the AMAs and stuff.
It definitely seems to be the key. But you know what? I've wondered about this before, but whether there's some kind of resistance on Dana's part, because she can speak English and she can sing in English, and occasionally she does, but never for whole songs. And I don't know whether it's I don't know whether she just refuses to.
If you can't handle me at my Spanish, you don't deserve me at my English.
Exactly, yeah. To which I say, more power to her. Go Dana. But she can do no wrong. Anyway, that's been another episode of F-Popriety. Toodle pip, toodle pop.
Good ep.
Good ep. That guy knows a lot about pop music.
Yes, he does. That was Dana Paola at number 4 for Craig. Number 3 for me. Hey Craig, remember when Beck was good?
I do.
Hey Craig, remember Outcast?
Yes.
Hey Craig, remember Genesis Owusu with Smiling with No Teeth, my number 3 album?
Ooh, interesting.
My goodness, another album that I heard off of the Make the Snare video. An artist I'd never heard of, Genesis Owusu's debut album, Smiling with No Teeth, is a weird stramash. Sorry for the Scottishism there. It's a bizarro psych pop, hip hop, synth rock melting pot of just pure unadulterated joy. An artist I'd never heard of, and he just jumped straight into number 3 of my albums of this year. Like, it's hysterical. It sounds like the best mixtape you've ever heard, but made by 5 different people, and then some guys just been like, oh, this is mine. It's so good. I don't know if you've heard the album, but it's...
Do you know what? I have not. This is one where you actually have the edge over me.
It is worth a check out. I don't know much about Genesis Obozo. I'm pretty sure I'm butchering his name.
I'm pretty sure there's also a rule that says you only listen to music artists with the word Genesis in their name, including Genesis.
Tommy Genesis Obozo, and the aforementioned Genesis. I can't dance. I can't talk. The only thing about me is...
the way that I drink my slavery apologies beer.
I feel like every time I've mentioned an album, you've heard it, so we have a good back and forth. But when I'm just describing it myself, I don't have much to say about it other than it's really good.
You heard it here first. Really good.
Heartily recommend this. It's he's also released 2 singles since the album came out, much like Dana Paola. They're not on the album, and they're getting better and better. It's perfect pop music for someone who's going to open their mind and listen to just weird fucking music. When he raps, his flow is incredible. It's a really kind of lyrical, sort of lazy. It kind of reminds me of like earlier Outcast kind of stuff he's doing. But when I said remember Beck, when he was, it's got a Beck style as well, where it's just kind of all over the map, and it's got that weirdoness to it. So it ticks a whole lot of boxes for me, and I can't recommend it highly enough.
Cool.
Go check it out.
All right, well, I'll add it to the list. All right, well, my number 3, James, is another jazz pick. Wait a second. Is this an episode of F Skronkiety, the podcast in which we discuss all things jazz?
I think it may be, Craig.
Cue the music, hip cat.
Now you must acquire a taste for freeform jazz.
Hello and welcome once again to F Skronkiety, the wonderfully named podcast all about jazz. Shoehorn edition by me, with my top 10 jazz albums of 2021. Number 10 is Whit Dickey and Matthew Shipp with Village Mothership. Number 9 is Artifacts with And Then There's This. Number 8, Micaiah McCraven with Deciphering the Message. Number 7, the always great William Parker with Mayan Space Station. Number 6, Jamie Branch with Fly or Die Alive. Number 5, Angel Bat Dawid with Hush Harbour Mixtape 1 Doxology. Number 4, Tony Allen, There Is No End. The great Afrobeat legend Tony Allen. This is his posthumous album. It's fucking amazing, by the way, James. I think you would dig it. It's got a lot of really interesting collaborations on it. Sampa the Great turns up.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, a whole bunch of MCs turn up. It's really pretty wonderful. It's a really well produced album. Number 3, Damon Locks and Black Monument Ensemble with Now, which I think I've mentioned on this podcast before.
You did.
Yeah, it's pretty great. Number 2, of course, the aforementioned Irreversible Entanglements with Open the Gates, which means my number 1 jazz album of 2021.
Drum roll, guys. Drum roll from 2 drummers, please.
Is perhaps predictably Black to the Future by Sons of Kemet. And if you want to hear me talk about this, just go back a few episodes to the episode titled Black to the Future Nostalgia.
Yeah. Let's take a couple of minutes to just again reiterate how good an album this is. This was going to be in my top 10, and I realised at that point my top 10 and your top 100 or whatever we're going to have so much overlap that it would have been pointless. So I kept it out for that, but it is my favourite Sons of Kemet album so far. This is a band that just keep pushing the boundaries.
They're definitely pushing their own envelope quite a great. I mean, if you want to hear me kiss Shabaka Hutchings' arse all day long, then go and listen to the aforementioned previous podcast episode. You won't be disappointed. He is a really bold musician and just such an adventurous artist and courageous. Like, he's really not afraid to try things. There are ideas going on in each of the Sons of Kemet albums that, I mean, I guess in a cliched way, it's the spirit of jazz to do new things. But I mean, there are a lot of jazz musicians that, I think we've been polite about it sometimes. It's not really, you're not really doing too much new there. But I think to Shabaka's credit, he's doing new stuff each time, and he's always picking really interesting collaborators, and he's got a great way of tailoring each of the pieces to the collaborators. The first single they released from this, Hustle, with Koji Radical and Leanne La Havas away in the background.
Yep.
That's such a great tune. And the quality of those two vocalist voices is just so astutely observed and so astutely used. And you know, of course, there's all the socio-political context of Shabaka's stuff that brings that extra energy to what I remember describing what is fundamentally party music. The stuff has always got a real party beat to it, and it's just infectious as fuck at the same time as being deep and profound. And yeah, part of me always kind of swithers when it comes to this, because it always seems like an obvious pick to pick Sons of Kemet, because they are like that British jazz combo of the moment. But I think if I'm honest with myself, they are making stuff that I do feel is utterly vital to this moment in time, and it is just utterly irresistible on both an unconscious and conscious level.
There is a reason why they are the spearhead of British jazz, and it's because they're just doing it like no one else can. So, yep.
Long may they reign.
Yep.
That's been another exciting episode of the mini podcast I forgot I was in. Which I believe is called F Skronkiety. Doodle pip.
Now you must acquire a taste for freeform jazz.
Number 2 on my top 10 albums, I Lie Here Buried With My Rings and Dresses by Backwash.
The aforementioned.
Yeah, stunning. So we're back over to you again.
Alright, cool. Well, my number 2, James, is an R&B pick, so I guess it's my highest ranked R&B album. Wait a second.
Are we going to do this?
James, I believe this is an episode of F-Sub R&B, the podcast in which we discuss all things R&B and soul music.
Cue the music.
Hello, welcome to F-Sub R&B, the podcast in which we discuss all things R&B music.
You velvety voiced fuck.
I don't know who this character is that I've just invented. I'm not sure I like him. But anyway, my top 10 R&B albums of 2021 are thus. Number 10, Joy Crooks with Skin. Number 9, Silk Sonic with Silk Sonic. Number 8, Pip Millet with Motion Sick. Number 7, Cleo Sol with Mother. Number 6, Salt with 9. Fun story about this album though. If you haven't heard it already and you couldn't get a hold of it, well, I guess you're out of luck, because it was literally only available for a few months.
Really?
Salt continuing their weird fucking campaign of just being the most esoteric R&B soul act on the planet.
The fucking R&B Boards of Canada.
Yes, yeah, exactly. But it was nice while it lasted. Number 5, Kirby says he wasn't the one. Number 4, the great, the wonderful, the fabulous, the much loved Georgia Smith with Be Right Back. Number 3, the fantastic Jasmine Sullivan with Hotels.
Almost made it into my top 10.
But if you want to hear me wax lyrical about that record, I did do so some episodes back. But Jasmine Sullivan is just one of the living greatest. So this is why I was saying my pick of Ramon earlier. So she's my number 2 here, because I essentially ranked her above both Jasmine Sullivan and Georgia Smith. But it's because I'm just trying to shout about Ramon, because she needs it in a way that Georgia and Jasmine don't particularly right now. They're doing okay, last I checked. Which means my number 1 R&B album of 2021, James, is Man Made by Green Tea Pang. This album is a feast. And it's a long album, but it does not overstay its welcome. There are so many ideas on this, so many things going on, so much utter, beautiful, deep lushness that I never get tired of it.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's not familiar with Green Tea Pang, where do you even begin?
Was it F Sobriety or F Sub R&B we dropped Green Tea Pang in?
I think it might actually be in an episode of F Sobriety, and then we segued into F Sub R&B, if I remember correctly.
Because I remember Green Tea Pang is up there with some of the biggest winners from points for me for an F Sobriety.
Yeah.
And so good.
She's a genre bending artist. So she's fundamentally a soul R&B artist, but there are elements of reggae in this, and there's elements of jazz and blues in it. She's incredible. She has such a distinctive voice, And she's got one of those vocal deliveries that sounds like she's almost falling asleep, but somehow it just sounds like the coolest thing on earth. She's like an old school lounge singer. With just such a rich, smoky voice. And lyrically, she's another one, but there's a lot of very esoteric things going on in her lyrics. There was a few singles she released prior to this album that do not appear on the album. And the album's long, and it's like, how much material have you got, and how is it all great? See, if you're a fan of old school soul and old school R&B, like neo soul from the 90s and the old school 70s stuff, there's enough of all of those things in here, and there's enough jazz flourishes in it that for those of you with a bit more kind of quote unquote sophisticated music taste, you'll be just as satisfied. I mean, there's just so much going on, and her palette is so wide.
Green Tea Peng juggles musical genres of that ilk the way Doom Patrol juggles its genres.
There's a comparison I did not expect, but I 100% endorse. And that has been another exciting edition of Have Some R&B. Oh, Pip.
Good ep.
That smoky voiced fuck sure knows a lot about R&B and soul music.
So this brings us to an exciting point in the podcast, Craig, where it's our best albums of the year.
You're right, it does.
My number one album of the year is by an artist whom I had, prior to this album, only cursory knowledge of.
Ditto. I'm saying ditto because I predicted where you're going.
The most I'd heard of them was, spoiler alert, my better half, my partner Sarah, is a big fan of Korean boy band BTS. So I had heard their vocals on the track Boy With Love, and then I heard the ridiculous news about who was producing their new album, and I was like, that sounds like it would be a laugh. I'm going to listen to that just for a giggle. And best album I've heard all year. My most listened to album that came out this year. I've had this on an almost constant loop since it came out. I love this album more than I should, probably. And that album, as you well know, is If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power by Halsey.
Yeah.
My God.
It is great.
This is the best Nine Inch Nails album that they could never possibly release, and I think this has brought something up for me. I think my main problem with Nine Inch Nails must be Trent Reznor's vocals, because all the Nine Inch Nails sounds are present, all the little funny keyboards and all the brr, 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 brr are there, but Halsey's songwriting and vocals elevate it, and then it elevates it in turn, and just for what she described as being a body horror album about pregnancy.
Yes,
I could listen to it endlessly. The opening track is so haunting and beautiful. Have you seen the film, by the way?
I have. Yeah, I got all of it. I got very obsessed with this for like a solid week, where I listened to nothing but this album and got very solid into investigating it. By the way, for those of you who do listen to our Twin Peaks podcast, this is probably the moment you say, hey, didn't Craig say he hated Nine Inch Nails? And I'm going to say I didn't say that. I said that Trent is actually a good producer. I was careful to say that. And I think this absolutely highlights for me what I would actually prefer to see Trent Reznor do, which is more stuff like this.
Right.
Just produce other people's stuff. But he is a good producer, and he made a fucking great job at this record. But I have to say, though, the real star is Halsey. Like, every single one of the songs, I was like, how do you come up with a line like that? That is fucking amazing. She really sharpened her pen for this record. It's incredible.
From the moment I put the album on and The Tradition played, I was like, I did not expect the album to sound like that at all. And I was like, oh my God. I actually watched an interview with Halsey, Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, where Trent Reznor actually said, basically what happened was Halsey was a big Nine Inch Nails fan. And the manager was like, oh, well, you're on the same label as Nine Inch Nails. And she was like, I don't want it to be a manager-to-manager thing. Just ask him. And at the time, it was during the pandemic, and Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross were like, we were thinking about doing a Nine Inch Nails album, but neither of us really wanted to work because we were just both so fucking worn out, but like wiped by the pandemic, we couldn't find it to work. And we're like, holy shit, you guys too, right? But basically what they said was, they heard the songs and they were into it, but Halsey brought the songs ready-made. All they did was just added a little bit of instrumentation and stuff to it.
I figured that was probably the case. And it works perfectly. And it's actually a perfect marriage. It totally works. I think the album is a perfect pop record. Just utterly mesmerising and astounding. Some of the lines on some of these songs The first time I heard a few of these songs, I remember having to skip back and listen to them again because I was like, I can't believe what I just heard there. That is an incredible piece of songwriting. There's just so many really intelligent lyrics in there, and again, it's one of those great uses of, she does use metaphors, obviously, but you also simultaneously know precisely what she means. But it's that way that you're free to take the song with you, as you are with any good song, and make it your own, and then project your own meaning onto it, you know? The songs are durable enough that way that it works that way. Yeah, it's a thrilling album to listen to from start to finish. It's really great. It's a really great, complete piece of work.
The lead single, I'm Not a Woman, I'm a God.
I'm Not a Woman, I'm a God, which not to be confused with the Tommy Genesis banger, A Woman is a God.
A Woman is a God, or Ariana Grande's God is a Woman.
God is a Woman, yes.
It's a good triumvirate there, though. But yeah, like for example, that the instrumentation of that, it just sounds like someone's taken Closer by Nine Inch Nails and sped up a bit, but it's just totally elevated by their songwriting and their lyricism and their performance. When Halsey's backing vocals become the lead vocals in the third chorus, it's just chef's kiss, man.
Yeah.
The lyrics in, I think it's 11:21.
That's my favourite song in the album.
Yeah.
I love that one. I find it devastating and painful to listen to, but it's so thrilling. It's so thrilling. Yeah, it's a work of pure genius and a work of pure art.
I am absolutely thankful that I just stumbled on it without realising that I was going to love it that much. I love it when albums surprise me like that. 2 out of my top 3 albums were ones that I didn't expect would make it anywhere near that. So, yep, my top pick, absolutely, number 1 album of the year, Halsey, If I Can't Have Love, I Want Power, and it should be higher up on more people's lists, but I've not seen it mentioned that much, so, I don't know, people are fucking idiots, I guess.
James, so, down to the business. My final one album that I was going to be the final album I'm going to mention on this podcast, definitely.
Only one album?
That's right.
Yep.
And it's a hip-hop... Wait a minute. Is this an episode of Hip Hop Variety, the podcast in which we discuss all things hip hop and other rap music and related genres?
You wouldn't credit it, Craig, but I think it is.
Roll the music. Hello, and welcome to Hip Hop Variety, the podcast in which we do the thing, you know what we do. So, and here I'm discussing my top 10 hip hop albums and other related rap music genre albums from 2021. Number 10, Arm & Hammer and the Alchemist with Haram. Number 9, the aforementioned Tommy Genesis with Goldilocks. Number 8, Any with Under 25. Any is a really skilled young British MC who I think is incredible. She's got a really unique, just a very unique delivery, and just her whole aesthetic is just so interesting. She should stick at it.
I checked her out after you mentioned her before, and yeah, she's great. She's got a bright future, that one.
Yeah. Now we literally do sound like men in our 60s.
Hello.
Number 7, Gets, Conflict of Interest. Number 6, Tyler the Creator, Call Me If You Get Lost. Number 5, Pink Sifu, Gumbo. Number 4, Rico Nasty, Nightmare Vacation. I'm going to stop here for a second. Rico Nasty has been getting some shit lately.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know if you saw any of this, but she was on tour with Playboi Carti, and when she went out to play a few gigs, Carti fans were throwing things at her, including glass bottles. And so there was all of the Rico Nasty stands, including myself. I include myself in that number. We're just sending her lots of encouraging messages and whatnot. And then she eventually got back up on social media, just having a totally give no shits attitude, saying, "Well, it's just made me want to go out and perform even more fiercely and fuck these guys." Like, cool, on you go. Rico Nasty is a treasure, an absolute fucking treasure. I think she's a unique artist, and she's, you know, in a similar way to what we were saying about Tommy Genesis, she's one of those young female artists that certain male hip-hop heads of a certain generation kind of really look down on and say, well, this isn't proper rap.
This isn't the rapping music from when I was a young man. Yeah,
this isn't the all-important apex of music that just happened to coincide when I was a young un. And the thing is, Rico Nasty is doing her own thing, and she's 100% original, and she has 100% her own style, and her own style of her lyrics are completely unique, and her whole aesthetic is completely unique, and her style of rapping, yes, it's not that old fucking rapid fire from the conscious age of hip hop, but that's because this isn't the 90s, and that's just not what young people are interested in listening to. I'm sorry to break that to you. That doesn't make it worth less just because it's not aimed at you.
Rico Nasty, come on the podcast, eh?
Rico, if you're you did it again, man. Rico, if you're listening, which I know you definitely are, we're going to get you all on at once. But Rico's a sublime talent, a unique talent, and she's adorable, and I fucking love her, and I feel protective of her in a weird way. And so when this shit happened, it absolutely enraged me. But anyway, Nightmare Vacation is not even her best release. Her stuff she's released prior to this is even better than this, and that's not a slight on this album. It's a great album. But yeah, she can do no wrong. I absolutely love Rico Nasty. She's a real positive force in the world. Anyway, number 3, Ocean Wisdom, Stay Sane. Ocean Wisdom is one of my favourite British MCs, has been for a few years, and it's been really interesting watching him mature over his past few releases. I struggled with not putting this in my actual overall top 10 because it's a great record. It's interesting that he recorded this over the first lockdown, and he seems to be like a lot of young rappers. There's a lot of bravado, of course, as always. That's what you expect. And it's interesting how almost all the bravado is removed from this record, because it's really about him recognising the outside world, and there's some really sober stuff on this. I will say the closing song of this, Can't Breathe Either, it's called, is maybe my favourite closing track of any record this year.
Holy shit.
Every time I listen to it, it just gives me such fucking chills. It's like, holy shit, that is a great song. He's an incredible lyricist, always has been, but now that he's on this record, that he's applying that lyricism to, consciously broader subjects, as it were, it's incredible how confident and just capable he is at doing it. And he's still a young guy, but credibly, he also, for those of you who are fans, the old crusties who are fans of old school, bar spitting, you're not going to have any problems with Ocean Wisdom, because he is one of the most insanely fast MCs I've ever heard, and his wordplay is just insane. Some of his freestyles, if you want to get off on some of that stuff, some of his freestyles on YouTube are just fucking insane.
Excellent.
But anyway, that was that. And number 2 was the aforementioned Backwash. I lie here, buried with my rings and my dresses. Which means, James,
what could possibly be your number 1 album for F Hip Hop Variety, and your number 1 album
and indeed
overall?
Well, it's been mentioned already. It's the little album that could. Sometimes I might be introvert by Little Sims. This album is a fucking masterpiece. I say this as someone who considers all of Simbi's albums to be masterpieces, and if you want to hear me wax lyrical about that, then go back to the old episode titled Fetch the Shotgun, in which I go through Simsi's entire discography up to the point prior to this being released.
Yeah. In fact, the day we recorded that was when she released the video for
Introvert. Yeah.
We did a live first listen.
We did a live reaction,
which I think was just silence while we were both
It was mainly just being gobsmacked.
Sometimes I Might Be Introvert is the kind of album that it's a once in a generation thing. It's epic in the best possible way. It slaps in the best possible way, and it's everything a hip hop album should be. It's not the best British hip hop album. It's not the best female hip hop album. It's just the best of the year, hands down. It capitalises on all of the things that Simbi has done so well, and that she is a grand storyteller, and she's fantastic at tying together all these little narratives into one cohesive whole. This actually does remind me of Stillness in Wonderland, her second album, in the sense that it feels almost like a concept album. There's a lot of personal stuff on this record, and she's another songwriter who's just got a great way of projecting out the personal and getting people to respond to it and communicate back with it. You feel like you're part of the narrative when you listen to it, even though she's listing things in her life that are very personal to her. It's that generous style of songwriting where the references are opaque enough that you can hang your own ideas onto them. Yeah, there's just so much of that going on here that's just so deep and so profound. She's always been an incredible MC, I think we can agree on that, but her actual lyrical skills here, and just the skills involved in her bars,
are a cut above now, and it's like she's always improving with every single release, and it never fails to amaze me just how much she can improve in leaps and bounds from one album to the next, just when I think she can't go any further.
Her songwriting and her vision just keeps growing. It's incredible.
She is one of our true living geniuses, and I've been saying that for years, and it's like, come on guys, surely you've got to get on this wagon by now. Look how fucking intelligent and visionary this young artist is. And she is still only 27 years old. It's nuts, man. And she's already released a body of work that, you know, someone in their 40s or 50s would be jealous of. It's absolutely crazy.
We did actually have a pretty funny chat about that on the Fetch the Shotgun episode when we talked about Little Sims and Fiona Apple. Well, Little Sims has done, I think, more music than Fiona Apple in a short space of time, whereas Fiona Apple's taken like 25 years to put out her body of work, and Simbi's done it in under a decade. She just keeps firing out these bangers. And
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, she's a real threat on so many counts as well, because she's obviously entirely in charge of the aesthetics of the album as well, and the way the album is constructed, and like a lot of her albums as well have these interludes where they have the spoken word parts, which she writes entirely, then she casts people to play the roles of the voices doing those things, and all of those things play a huge role in the whole piece coming together. There's so much more I could say about this, but I do compel people, just if you're interested in hearing me talk about Little Sims, I did talk about a lot, about all of her like recurring motifs and recurring obsessions, and really getting deep with her stylistic progression.
Not to blow our own trumpets here, it's a bloody good episode of the podcast.
Dude, I'm really proud of that episode. I think we did a good job in that episode, and I was really proud with the work I did for Little Sims on that episode. And really the only purpose of making that episode was because she's an artist I find endlessly inspiring. Like, age doesn't come into it. Yeah, I'm a guy in my 40s and she's someone in her 20s. It doesn't really matter, because she's such a powerful artist. She's speaking about truths that are just universally human, at the same time while making them very specific about herself. She's just a great communicator of ideas, as well as all the obvious things of being a superbly skilled MC and musician. But it is fascinating to watch her progression as an artist, and if you're interested in hearing what is effectively a long essay I assembled and then presented as a podcast, then by all means go and check out the episode titled Fetch the Shotgun.
It's also got like an hour of me talking about Fiona Apple just sort of stapled on the end.
Or as we say here on F Hip Propriety, Vince stapled on the end.
But yeah, this album is an epic. It's a work of art.
It does seem to have been a watershed for her. I mean, the reception to it has definitely been wider and, you know, larger, more widespread than any of her previous records. But I mean, for me, I was always saying, come on, this is a classic, guys, about all of her previous albums. So, but I think the effect it will ultimately have is that people will go back and look at the earlier albums again, or for the first time if they've not experienced them. Yeah. So I do think there will be a process of those eventually slotting into the prestige that they deserve.
But one thing we can be probably assured of is she's not going to sit back and rest on her laurels. She's probably going to put out another 4 albums.
Yeah, I mean, she is a mad workaholic. It's crazy how much she just keeps working. But more power to her. I'm happy she exists and keeps doing it, because she is just one of our true greats. King Simbi, long may she reign. And that wraps it up for another exciting episode of FF Propriety. Doodle blip.
Doodle blip. Good ep.
And that wraps it up for our pretty epic rundown of our fave music from 2021, and pretty much all of the things I think we've got on our plate to deal with. James, I don't know about you, but as we say in Scotland, I'm puggled.
I am a bit on the half-cut side, Craig. We're waving goodbye to 2021 in the most traditional Scottish way we can, which is by getting really fucking drunk and doing a podcast. So I guess all that remains for us is to wonder where the fuck Alan is.
Well, yes. Wonder where the fuck Alan is. Alan, please get in touch. Alan, if you're listening, which we know you are, if you can jostle your way past Jay Bowman, Julia Ducournau, WWE wrestler Thea Trinidad. But yeah, I guess what I want to say is, to you guys listening, you wonderful people, for slugging all the way through this nonsense. We cannot thank you enough. And if we've done anything to provide any modicum of entertainment for you during this festive season, then by golly, we are proud to have done so.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for sticking with us, not only through 30 episodes of the podcast now, Craig.
Yep, it's a milestone.
Over like a year and a half, but through, in particular, this episode of the podcast.
Which is 9 hours long.
If this is your first time listening, let me first of all reassure you our podcast's not usually this long or this much of a drunken shambles. Traditionally, what we do is we tend to cover specific episodes or series of television, and we throw other stuff in there. We throw in what we've been listening to, we throw in movies, and occasionally we will do fully music-based episodes. Starting next year, in January, we are going to be returning to our roots, but also progressing forward. We're going to be returning to our Mr. Robot rewatch in January.
Yes, for those who've been waiting patiently, we are finally getting back to that in the new year.
Yeah, we're going to be beginning Mr. Robot Season 2, but we will be alternating with Welcome Back, Twin Peaks fans, Twin Peaks The Return.
For those of you who've been waiting patiently for that also. Sitting in the roadhouse waiting for that guy to finish sweeping. Congrats, it's almost over.
Be sure to join us for that. And if this is your first episode, why not go back, listen to some of our older episodes, or stick with us for the future? Who knows, you might even enjoy it. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please tell a friend. Tell several friends.
Spread the word.
Do us a download, do us a like, a comment, all the usual stuff. It's Christmas, you know? Give the gift of internet liking.
Yeah, that's what Christmas is all about. Even our normally grumpy AI, the HamilTron, agrees.
Yeah, I think that's it for another episode of F-Sobriety, and I think that's it for another year, Craig.
That's it for another 2021. Anything you're looking forward to in 2022, James?
New episodes of Atlanta.
Oh yeah, finally, new episodes of Atlanta. I remember we had this conversation about 2021, what seems like just yesterday. Look forward to a vaccine. I got that, so that was nice. But it didn't stop me from getting the Unicron variant. Speaking of which, I have to go feast on another cybernetic planet.
I'm looking forward to getting my booster jab. And all in all, just having another grand year.
And the endless shit show that is our reality now.
Yep. So let's hand it over to the HamilTron to give you our final warm wishes and our season's greetings.
Guys, have a good festive season, however you celebrate it. Have a great new year. All the best for 2022. We will see you on the other side of it. Take care of yourselves, and as Jerry Springer would say, of each other.
Before we go, though, how's that bottle of Prano Bailey's looking there, Craig?
Prano Bailey Bonds' bottle is somewhere in the region of the more or less 50%. That's a total lie. I've drank most of it. But for the purposes of this bit here, it is round about the 50% mark.
That's another way you could say that this Christmas time, Craig.
This Christmas time, there's no need to be afraid, James, because that is half the bottle.
Toodle
Toodle
pip.
pip.
Merry Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho.
Well, that's been a hell of an episode. Thanks for sticking with us. Not much left to do now except... Who's that at my door? Nobody knows how to access my virtual space. Except for... Wait a minute.
Hello there.
Oh, why hello, Mr. Bond. I mean Todd.
I believe you have something of mine.
Yes, I have your framed and signed photograph of Carolyn Ray right here. Care to stay for a drink?
Yes.
Merry Christmas one and all.
Merry Christmas.
All that remains is for me to say that F-Sobriety, episode 30, My Yule Log has a message for you, was conceived by Craig Woods, James Hamilton and Ellen Todd, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Ho 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 Off the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates by Errors, available on Rock Action Records. Come spend some festive time with us on our social medias, on Facebook at facebook.com/fsobrietypodcast, on Twitter at fsobrietycast, on Instagram at fsobriety, and search YouTube for F-Sobriety Podcast. We'll be back in January with more Twin Peaks, Mr. Robot and other such discussions, but in the meantime, why not soundtrack your festive period with the F-Sobriety Jukebox playlist on the Grinch of Music service, Spotify, featuring all the music referenced in the show. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, from our house to yours, we can't stand the quiet.
And get settled in as we... Fuck! No, we're not gonna fuck. Fuck! What's the guy's
Well, this
name
is a
that
bait
did
and
the-
switch.
Wait, what's the guy I brought you here for that. What's the guy that did the Top of the Pops theme tune that I'm always
Paul
getting
Hardcastle.
insert? Paul Hardcastle, right. Start
The
that
Wizard by Paul Hardcastle is what you're looking for.
While I'm on this, probably should mention at this point, like every single I started drinking early.
James talked pretty one day.
As a protagonist, Kate Winslet's character, fuck, whose name escapes me at this point in time.
Believe it or not, it's Mayor.
Mayor. I was like, what's her name? In this show, Mayor of East End. I'm going to start that again. I'm going to cut that out because that's a beamer. Fucking having a mayor over here.
You're having a right mayor.
Yeah.
Come on, you tell us what albums came out that year, James. Didn't Fiona Apple's first album come out that year?
No, that was 96.
Oh, god damn it.
94.
You sure about that?
Yeah. What came out in 94?
I can tell you that Little Sims was born in 1994.
Fuck off, man.
True story.
Nope, this was born in 1994. We were alive.
No, you were right. Alright, I don't know why I doubted you. I don't know why I thought I knew something about Fiona Apple.
Is it
that
just
you
because you assume that she would have released, like, she released 5 albums and you think she can't have released them beginning 1996? That seems like too regular a release schedule.
Yeah, I did. That was basically it. Well, James is away having a piss. This is my perfect moment to reveal my top 10 WWE wrestling matches that I've subtitled in 2021. And James will hear this and think it's a joke, and it's not a joke. I've subtitled a hell of a lot of WWE this year. That's my job, guys. I'm a subtitler. And I've done a lot of extracurricular research during that time for a certain reason. And now my YouTube algorithms are all fucked up, and I have to tell my YouTube algorithms, guys, I don't really like wrestling that much. I'm just really, really thirsty for Zelina Vega. Otherwise known as Thea Trinidad. My favourite wrestler for many reasons. Some of them are probably obvious. She's a Puerto Rican queen. Now Queen Zelina, in fact, after winning the Queen's Crown tournament. That's how you have to refer to her now. So bow down to Queen Zelina. I know I do. Zelina/Thea, if you're listening, get in touch. It's a little cheat for you to listen back to later.
Sorry about that pee hole of the abyss.
Okay, that is the funniest joke you've made on this podcast.
Fuck, I need to leave that in there. Yep.
Oh, it's very natural. I'm glad we did it that way.
Yep.
You cannot tell we're under the cosh at all.
Sorry, listeners, it's nearly 1 a.m. and we're both quite drunk.
Yeah, and I have to work at 9 o'clock.
Jesus Christ, really?
Yes.
Nope.
This was a good idea. Don't know who that guy is, but I don't like him.
I don't know who that guy is, but he's going to star in the next Ben Wheatley film.
He sounded like a Peter Serafinowicz character, actually. It's Dwayne Benzie.
Thanks, ants. Thanks.